I've been running around with this idea since 2014. Can we quantify today how much of Jake's life and my life is dependent on space? Where are the vulnerabilities on all these kinds of stuff? And today, if one of those assets were knocked out, do we have a redundancy? And do we have a reliability? And, you know, what is the insurance angle on something like this?
Hey everybody, welcome to the Future of GovCon. This is a weekly podcast that we put together to bring to experts from across the industry and look at what's happening today and how it's going to impact the future. I'm Jake Frazer. I'm the owner and CEO of Precision Talent Solutions. In leading one of the industry's top executive search firms, I get to talk to influencers every day. C-suite executives, board members, growth leaders, top government officials, military flag officers. And on this podcast, what we're doing is we're bringing in these experts from AI, from space, from medical, from logistics, from engineering, and we're sitting down and talking about what's happening in their specific area of the industry and how it will impact the future. So pour a cup of coffee and let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Future of GovCon. We talk to a lot of smart people on this podcast, and today we bring you one of the big minds that's done a lot across government. Our guest this week is a true expert and a deep thinker about what's going on with space and how it applies to our national security. We're thrilled to have on our podcast today, Bharath, I'm going to try and say it right, Gopalaswami. Did I say it right? Gopalaswami.
Perfect. You got it right on the first attempt.
All right. Where are you calling in from today, Bharath?
From a sunny Chicago, from the suburbs of Chicago. So I want to also take the opportunity to thank you and extend a warm welcome to anybody listening to this podcast to Chicago.
All right. You're our first Chicago guest. So that's awesome. Bharath's one of our experts. He's got so much knowledge and experience around space, and we're going to dig into that today. That domain is becoming so critical right now, and it's moving so fast. I think that people in our audience, if you're not tracking that domain and what's going on, it's going to impact everything else we do in the other four domains. And so the discussion today with Bharath should open a lot of eyes, hopefully give a lot of ideas about where this area of the government contracting industry is evolving, because we have a great guide with us today. Is that set up okay, Bharath?
That sounds perfect. Yeah. I'm not, I'll believe I'm the expert until I'm called out otherwise. Okay. So, and I want to be called out otherwise.
We'll try it. Yeah. We'll try and do it politely though. So, I'm going to talk about Bharath because I think he's a humble guy. I won't talk too much about himself, but he's got incredible background, and I'll let him pepper in some of the details, but I'll share with you. He's the CEO and founder of Mission Resilient Solutions, which is a fast-growing, obviously a startup from which he's a founder, but a very innovative government contractor that's already putting together joint ventures with some of the greatest universities across. They're working around the industry, but he has an incredible track record. He spent 5 years at the Atlantic Council. And those of you that watched our podcast a couple of weeks ago, where we had Barry Pavel come on, and hopefully didn't scare you too much. But Barry and Bharath worked together at the Atlantic Council. Well-educated man, has a PhD from the Trinity College of Dublin, which must have been a good time, as well as a good education as a doctor of philosophy, aerospace, aeronautical, and astronautical engineering. I was a communications major, so that's pretty impressive. He attended the International Space University, where he has a master's in space studies. Who else has that? That was in Strasbourg, France. Has done postdoctoral work at Cornell, and he's also an author. I encourage you all to look up the Space Review, and maybe we can put the the link in the podcast so everybody can see it. He's written several articles on the space industrial base, on Golden Dome financing, the NDAA acquisition reform, and many other things. So he's a real thought leader. And so if you're looking for an expert in space, I don't know many folks that have a master's in space studies. So congratulations on getting that, Bharath.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That's a very generous introduction. Like they say, I can't remember the saying correctly. If my mother heard it, she would have believed it, and if my wife heard it, she would have certainly believed it. So
We'll have your wife on then, talk to her. So, yeah, just your background. You grew up as true internationalist, bouncing between India and Oman, right?
that is, yeah.
Talk a little about growing up
So,
in
yes, thank you. I grew up, I was born in the southern state of India, which is Chennai, Tamil Nadu, the capital is Chennai, the city. I was raised in Bombay, which is one of the financial hubs. So I learned to speak Hindi out there. Then my father got a job in Oman when we were teenagers. So we moved to Oman. So that was my first introduction to from a democracy to a monarchy, how to, and to the Middle East per se. In my early teenage years, the understanding of the Arab culture and the different political system and those kinds of issues. And then we returned to India. I got my graduate degree in aerospace engineering and then went to work very briefly for the Indian Space Research Organization. It was an accident that happened, and it was a good accident that happened. And early 2001, and I was in the launcher industry of it. So on the launch side of things, to say so to speak.
Was your father a scientist or?
He was a corporate, in the US, he would be called a CFO or a credit controller. Okay.
So how did you get interested in science? What was the lead in?
The lead was, I think everybody, the southern city, Chennai, has always been home to science and engineering of me. It was a hotbed of science and engineering. For example, the CEO of Google comes from my city.
Wow.
And there are the Perplexity, the founder of Perplexity is also from Chennai. Okay. So some of these companies and tech and science, every other person. So for me, maybe it was a lack of creativity that I also did science, and maybe I was not supposed to do science. Okay. So, but having said that, but that's where the focus was during those days, and everybody did it. And so I did it too.
Did you go to international school in Oman or?
No, it was an Indian school in Oman.
Okay.
So, it catered especially to the Indian clientele. It was synchronous with the Indian syllabus so that we could come back to India to pursue our graduate degrees. So that is effectively, that's how I went in. Yeah. And did you work in the Middle East? Or
I worked in Dubai, yeah, for a couple of
in
years.
Dubai,
So,
right? Yeah. So that's why I was like, yeah. So, I mean, and of course, the Middle East was much different and much quieter those days than what it is now, right? I mean, yeah. So I enjoyed the stint a little bit there, came back, and then went to ISRO for a brief stint before I got offered a scholarship to go to the International Space University. What they were trying to do is popularize themselves in the space industry amongst space agencies across the world. So they had a few resident faculties, and most of them were international faculties from all around the world.
So they were posted up in Strasbourg, is that right?
Yeah, it was the most random place for them. But Strasbourg has the European Parliament,
Right,
and
yeah.
people, and many people today, when they visit France, every second neighbor here goes to Paris, but nobody goes to Strasbourg. And I strongly recommend people
Best city, yeah.
to go to Strasbourg, saying it's off the beaten path, nice wine country, and an expose to the Alsace culture and all that stuff. So I enjoyed my time there.
I bet.
Yeah, nice days. Then I got a small stint at Astrium because of my Astrium today is Airbus,
right?
And those days it was Astrium, the satellite design and manufacturing wing of the European Aeronautics and Defense and Space Company in a place called Friedrichshafen in Germany, in southern Germany, just across, I think, where you live. Again, wonderful days. And when your first check comes, it's even more wonderful, right? First paycheck, when you start earning, it's even more, you have the flexibility of spending and that, those kinds of stuff. Yeah. And my favorite memory about that place was what my boss taught me one day. And he said, there are always better things in life to worry about. And I'm in still touch with him. And I communicate once in a while, saying, when I go through stuff, I tell him, his name is Matthias, and I write to him, dear Matthias, I still remember that you told me there are always better things to worry about, and I'll carry that as long as I can.
Good one.
Yeah.
It's a really good one.
Yeah, and then I think I was looking for a German system in that wherever I was working had two different strands. One, you would be a diploma engineer or a doctor engineer. And to become a doctor engineer, you needed to get a PhD. So that's how you jump your salary scale and move up the ladder there. And one such happened. Trinity College Dublin was, I ran into Henry Rice, my advisor, um, subsequently in one of those settings, and he said, "Do you model noise and sound?" My first project was modeling noise out of rockets, and we would measure the noise when a rocket was launched. And in Astrium, while I worked on satellite observation, it was a mathematical technique that I was hired to do. And Trinity College Dublin became the same story in a sense that he said, I have a solver that I need somebody to build. If you're capable of building these things, if you'd like to build this thing along with us, you're welcome to Trinity College Dublin. So I said yes. And I got the PhD position. Our main project was basically, we were doing some research work for Airbus, the A380 program. We were one of the research partners for them. So we were modeling noise out of airplane engines.
Interesting.
And along the way, I think I started reading. Those were 2003, 2004. It was the WMD Iraq thing was big in the news. And I was watching all the weapons inspections and how do people detect nuclear explosions and stuff. And then that drew me to research some of these international security programs. Cornell, Princeton, and Stanford. I think Stanford still has the program. I'm not sure the status of these programs. Princeton has a science and global security program as part of their international security. They hire scientists and engineers to do um, uh, international security or policy related work. So I got hired by Cornell. I did a postdoctoral That's how I applied to the Cornell program. And then I got it. It used to be called during those days as the Peace Studies program.
Okay.
Because the primary focus was you need scientists and Hans Bethe and stuff after the nuclear weapons came into the picture. You needed people who build these systems to be really responsible about them and assess them and ask critical questions with the industry and the policymakers to make sure that these one, they don't go into the right hands and they're used appropriately in the way they are supposed to be used. That's how I transitioned fields into Cornell. And I did that program for 2 years. It's a 2-year postdoc, 1 year and an extension for 1 year. I did that. And then what I specialized there was studying my acoustic backgrounds. And there was a science called infrasound, the Comprehensive Testband Treaty organization based out of Vienna, has a robust network of sensors around the globe. And there is a science called infrasound, which was very active in the 1960s. But ever since nuclear explosion went underground, that field died. But with the CTBT coming back, because they were monitoring with, seismic sensors, hydroacoustic sensors, infrasound sensors, and radionuclide stations, and on-site inspection. It was a five-layer system of verification. So I specialized in infrasound to see, although I came at it from a very different angle. They did not like what initially they were hearing from me, is because I would say you could detect missile launches through infrasound. If a missile was launched 500 kilometers away, you could find the trajectory based on the trajectory and the emissions. You can do the forensics to see what was launched, where was launched with the ground truth.
Okay.
So I was an Indian citizen at that time. So nobody would give me the software or access to data because India was not a signatory to the treaty. That was a vague gray area. Nonetheless, I found a willing partner in the Kazakhstan National Data Center. I went and did my research work with them. I stayed there in KNDC in Almaty for a month, understanding how they measure these kinds of stuff. How do they track? The software was done by the French Atomic Energy Agency, and that was socialized with everybody. And they would give it, that it was more for a research purpose. So they were very willing partners. we would find, Jake, I could tell you, they detected this phenomena called microbaroms, from the Atlantic Ocean. So they were seeing what would this noise be from, coming, fine, it would blow over all the way to Kazakhstan, and they would be detecting these kinds of stuff, only to later discover these are coming from the Atlantic Ocean. They once detected things like flaring of gas in the south of Kazakhstan, and they said it became a big political issue because the Chinese companies were doing some of those things, and it was an environmental issue. So they had to work to make sure that this doesn't get very controversial and stuff. So I learned a lot, about the things you pick up along the way. More than the signs are operationalization of any project, right? I mean, I again, one of the other sayings is vision without resources is hallucination. Now, okay, you may have the vision to go and do the research, execute the research, but you need the money to go, you need the flexibility, you need the work permits or the visa permits to go. So you put all these things together, then the task becomes, everybody always looks at the finished product. Yes, making complex things simple is always the challenge. And the beauty about all these GovCon industry and everything is nobody sees the amount of sweaty labor. They just see when a finished product comes.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, that's how I think these are things that I picked up along the way. Then I got hired by SIPRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. It's largely funded by the Swedish Foreign Ministry to do arms control and disarmament work. They had an arms control and disarmament portfolio. So they were looking for some guy who does these kinds of science and engineering guy who does a little bit of missiles. And they also supported the CTBTO big time. So it geographically also helped me to go to Vienna many times. We heavily argued at that time I think while the science and engineering work was just one part, the main argument was I was behind them to do this. Let's publicize the data, bring the scientists and engineers from all around the world, because we may detect, and what if data and ideas are best used when they are shared.
Right.
So let's spread the data around, even if states are not signatory to the treaty, bring the scientists in, keep the politics out, bring the scientists in. Maybe you will find an earthquake scientist or an engineer discussing about some things in the way, and he may detect new novel methods. He may come up with ideas that you have not seen before. I think that was a policy shift that we made during that leadership of the organization then. And spent 2 years in Stockholm doing it. Wanted to come back to the wanted to come back to the States. I recognized that my future is in the States. I enjoyed the ample career opportunities that America offers, and also the flexibility to be creative. I think that is what drew me. And everybody can find a path if he has one, and if he can carve one, right? I mean,
That's right. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. So how did you get into like the government contracting space? What was your
after the Atlantic Council familiarized with me through the policy and the process of it.
okay?
But
So 5 years there, were you doing space related work there?
Largely space and defense related. We were interacting with the Lockheed Martins and the General Atomics. We were. I was arguing more for. I was the head of the South Asia Center, so I was like arguing. Platform sales for the U.S. ensures longer. It's a strategic platform sales are strategic relationships. So I said, if you wanted to make friends with countries, you have to loosen your export control regulations and find ways to. That's how I got familiarized with the initial thing of the export control laws and stuff. So I was doing space and um, uh, defense stuff there.
How did you get recruited in? How did you get the job at the Atlantic? What's that process look like?
It was an open application. Okay, so I just applied. Went through the steps, series of the one interviews, the two interviews, the three interviews, then come and meet the people. So there's no shortcuts to, in any of these things. There was, I think, either somebody has picked me up with a publication or somebody has picked me up through the regular process. So, and it worked out. And I discovered there also, again, like Atlantic Council is one of those think tanks that is, Fred has done a tremendously great job. It has no endowment like the Brookings or the Carnegies of the world. So you had to, and that taught me a beautiful thing again, that, how do you build everything from scratch and manage a program, get the money, deliver it, and sustain your programmatic support over the period of time. That's what, and in a way, it was a startup. Okay, because Fred just says, you define your problem, you find the resources to solve it, and don't make your problem my problem. Okay, you run your show. Yeah.
So you're running a P&L within the Atlantic, essentially, right?
Yeah, you basically run a P&L. Yeah, we're not supposed to say it in those many ways because it's a nonprofit, but you're basically, I don't want you coming up with deficits or political issues. You need to set yourself apart. Don't do this because everybody else does it. Okay. Don't do that. So, and if you did something exciting, then I will support you. Again, don't make a mess that I need to clean up. Okay, so that was effectively the unsaid rule, and that allows the creative flexibility to do what you want to do.
Okay.
So then after spending so many years in the in the university nonprofit, I finally transitioned into Alpha Tech Systems and Consulting, which was a tech company out of IT systems and consulting out of Maryland. So to selling into the aerospace, basically IT consulting company for all the aerospace clients and stuff. He wanted me to develop that portfolio for him. So I was doing almost like next to the CEO kind of thing, almost as man Friday for that. So I understood how a real business works. What's the margin you need to keep? How does the whole thing work? The man management, the P&L kind of stuff in a very different context. So I learned those things, and in the context of which is like one of the companies in the UAE came to me and asked. They were setting up some operations in Armenia. They wanted some counseling on the export control laws and stuff. So they said, we'd like your counsel on this if you'd. While I was spending time with them, I got some bright idea to just launch that armoring company on my own. So went and I did that in Nairobi. I miserably failed in my first endeavor. The second time, I corrected some of those mistakes and found a willing client in Angola, and then started liaising with. I had a good relationship and kind of did as subcontracting work effectively in Angola for a UAE prime contractor called Calidus. So they manufacture a light attack plane and armored vehicles, and they are also in the UAV business. Everybody talks about Edge, but this is like a
pre-Edge.
This is still a big entity that doesn't have that big branding, but it's its own branding. But I understood at that time, after my first experience, I understood the thing that you're solving in Africa for many of these big vehicles and programs is a capital problem, and it's not a technical problem. And within the UAE, it was much easier to address those problems.
Sure. Yeah, more capital there.
Yeah, and in this where is like when you're setting up some of these things, I got into ISOA during those days, and I found a completely different line of work, which is the base operations support people, the KBRs of the world, the Amentums of the world, and stuff. I started working with some of these subcontractors who would want to service some of their requirements in Africa, and those days we had even a base in Niger and stuff. We were doing some work for them, like the guys like the Stability and all these people. So that's when I really dove deep into some of these pockets and started familiarizing myself with the GovCon work, like all from an entrepreneurial journey. Nothing from. I lost in one of the bids. The first bid that I ever won, I lost money, and I found out that bid nobody wanted because they knew that everybody would lose money. Okay,
exactly. So how did you get into the space sector? I mean, I know you had early academic, and then it sounds like you took a bit of a detour.
Yeah, but I was always writing and publishing on space throughout. My first grant at the Atlantic Council was from the Smith Richardson Foundation to write a book on space, which I delivered to them. Okay, so and I used to do space security work even at CIPRI, at the Atlantic Council, and so on. I kept writing and reading on space and following the space work throughout. So it's never my co-author that you see, Daniel Gant, at that time. He was in the OSD policy for space. So we used to liaise together when he was in government at that time, dealing with space issues for the longest of times. So I was primarily interested in international space collaboration for maritime domain awareness and space situational awareness. So that I never dropped that academic and that kind of interest on that subject ever. So it's something that now I've revisited it more on a aggressive basis.
So during part of our prep, you're talking about the space sector, which is it's super complex, growing quickly, and becoming such a part of our national security. And you'd say it's not about rockets, right? It's about the industrial base. It's about the logistics, the supply chain. Talk a little bit about your view of where the you have commercial space is intersecting with the military space sectors, and where do you see the biggest challenges right now?
The biggest challenge is let me take a step back, right? I mean, in 2014, when I was at the council, I noticed SpaceX was in. We were on the 12th floor in 1030 Washington D.C. SpaceX government people were on second floor. So I climbed down to them and went and I said, I'm interested in space. Is there a way that you and I could work together on, right? At that time, there was a debate going on about RD-180. It was the Crimea time RD-180 engine, which was like a part of the United Launch Alliance, and they came from Russia, all that kind of stuff, right? I mean, so there was a supply chain issue at that time itself. And second, they were pushing to the SpaceX people. The reason I'm explaining to you, LC, is like they were pushing that we are solely restricted to civilian and NASA related activities, but we want to be participants to more of the DoD activities because we believe we have the technologies, okay, that can offer this kind of that kind on par with anybody else, and that's the mindset. It has taken us a good few years. They were ready in 2014, 2015, right? But it's taken a good few years for us from the government always moves late than anything. It always takes something very big to happen, and government always responds. There is never a proactive mentality towards these kinds of. And today, from after 1960s, this is the first time that we are witnessing the technological innovation in a completely different pace, different dimension. Every day that you see is in a completely different trajectory. The venture capitalists sometimes are quick to jump onto that bandwagon because they see money in it. The government takes time to change. There are some positive signs with the OTA, the TINA, these kinds of stuff where startups can directly compete for those kinds of contracts within the government ecosystem. So that is the biggest challenge, in the civilian. That barrier has to. 1% of the U.S. economy, 1% of the U.S. GDP is the space economy.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Okay, but nobody recognizes how it is embedded into our real day lives. Nobody really thinks about it because it's something up there, right? But it's you and I are. There is some space technology involved in what you and I are doing right now.
Sure. Yeah.
The communication architecture,
satellites, and
yeah. So the civilian and the military dimension is very subjective, and it shouldn't exist as such. Yes, government has a particular way of acquiring systems that it needs to be tested, qualified, and everything. That's okay. I mean, it should be the way it should be. But there has to be a malleable system where it allows some of these startup entrepreneurs to just directly sell without, from your angle, it would be those guys in the acquisition who can speak the old contractual language as well as the new, can interact with the new people also, right? And they have to, that communication barrier has to be somewhat mature.
What's your view of the capacity in the space industrial base right now?
Capacity in a sense of
is there enough capacity to support what needs to be done, or
there is enough capacity, but I told you again, like vision without resources, hallucination, right? Now, I'll answer this with a little bit of a money question, and I'll tell you why it's a little scary and where the fragility and the brittleness lies, right? Today, your national debt is $1 trillion. It's almost your DoD budget or a DOW budget today, right? And by 2036, if this is expected around 2.5, your interest payments are 2.36 trillion, it are projected to be around 2.36 trillion in the year 2036. Now, if you're in this trajectory, it's your fiscal capacity, I mean, to like do discretionary spending, other spending, and then it always comes into it. Then it becomes a little bit of the political football. Yes, we currently have the capability, capacity. There are enough prime and enough startup people to sell the technology. But think about it in other terms, right? I mean, and you cannot, for some of these programs, you have to, it's a mindset. We talked about the mindset. It's a mindset things. Now, space should be, in my argument, space should be the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, came a month ago and said that your Golden Dome is going to cost you like 1.15 trillion or something more than that, right?
Right. Then they
Now,
upped it.
yeah, I mean, I'm like, okay, that is fine. Now, if you see that as a merely another weapons procurement platform, you're right. Now, if you see this as an infrastructure and long-term horizon and infrastructure, then it's the lens which you apply. If you see it on a ledger, that's right. But if you see it at the lens, that is completely different. What is the price you're going to put on defending the homeland
Right.
against adversarial threats, which are like the drone swarms and this and that, the bunch of stuff? How do you defend it? And give me what is your counter proposal for, other than that? Okay, don't look, I'm just saying it like, yeah. So do we have the capacity? We have the technical capacity. Okay, we have smart people. You are better qualified to answer this question than I am, that do we have the skilled people to pursue these things? That can be done. Money is, for always everything, look at the money, right? Follow the money, look at the money, look at the ledger books, how is your spending? And if you're like 1 year, a program is a multi-funding horizon. You need a long-term horizon funding. 1 year funding is a promise, not a program. After 4 years, you cannot expect Congress to appropriate every year, depending on the midterms and whatever political things are going on. Somebody changes their mind, and then the downstream suppliers. I'm building a company, okay, a counter UAS company. I'm looking at where the money is. I'm following the money. I need to be profitable. Now, if I need to make substantial investments, I need to know that there is a buyer with the pocket that will buy those programs.
Sure.
So that is, I think I've explained this point enough. I think you get the picture, right?
So we see a $1.5 trillion defense DOW budget request, which may or may not all go through. There's a big chunk set aside for space in there. Where do you see the priorities?
Yeah, I mean, okay, there is the Golden Dome is obviously one of the biggest priorities for me, right? So, and out of the Golden Dome, to just merely track, if you estimate it, to merely intercept like 10 ICBMs, it takes a constellation of 7,800 satellites. Okay. And now the priority for me would be, extrapolate this along the overall industrial base, right? Interceptors, this, that, all these kinds of little components that you go. Imagine one of those satellites is taken out, or two of them there is of course redundancy built in the system, but there is also a regular maintenance work that needs to be done. Can you replenish these satellites? Do you have enough launch capacity to launch them appropriately, to make sure the system is always alert, agile? Like the bad guys always have to win once. You have to win 100 times.
Yep.
Right? And if anything, the recent theater has shown the warfare has moved slightly in a very asymmetric way, right? I mean, then you are doing multi-billion dollar, you're doing a few $100 million interceptors against cheap $20,000 drones. So then your sensor layers have to appropriately work. Okay. Then the detection, the categorization, and the interception layer. So in that, I think that's where the space will heavily. Those are the main areas which will, again, the the Mavins of the world, the Palanters of the world. Yes, great products, wonderful. They get the credit, but the people who build the real hardware, without the sensor, AI is nothing. If you don't feed in data, you don't get anything.
Right.
Take them out. Yeah.
So then, I mean, it's often said if you don't win the space domain, then I mean you can forget the rest. You can forget land, sea, air, and cyber is kind of somewhere in between. What 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 do you see the future of warfare? What do you see happening in space from defense? You talk about the maintenance and that part, but do you see actual kinetic things happening in space where adversaries are going after the infrastructure?
I would not put that far. Long time ago, I think the scary part, long time ago, a Chinese colleague of mine and I published what a Indian Chinese space war would look like. Okay. Because the kinetic, it's you in the nuclear domain today, you have the non-proliferation treaty, or for whatever it's worth, there are few arms control measures that still those are still active. Okay, they're still valid, at least on paper. Okay. And there is internationally agreed norms in space. Also, there was largely the last ASAT that the United States did in 1986. Okay. The Chinese broke that norm in 2007 by blasting one of their satellites, and it's been politically contested and this and that. The framing of it. I'm not here to debate the framing of it. Again, now that's a missile defense test or a space test. Nobody. It's still. I think most experts would argue it's more of a space test. Okay. Then the United States followed with their SM-3 interceptor in 2000. I think around the same time frame in 2007, 2008, with an Aegis class. So then India followed suit, or they claim to do that. Okay, so they've all fielded capabilities, and it's not, and the jammings and the spoofings within the first hour of this warfare in Operation Epic Fury, around I think 10,000 commercial ships were jammed or spoofed and stuff. Okay, the Iranians categorically have moved away from GPS to BeiDou, which is the Chinese navigation system. So what does this tell you? In a sense that they've recognized your vulnerabilities because your position, navigation, timing are dependent. Your C4 ISR are dependent on space. Okay. So why would I not, target? There are soft kill and hard kill mechanisms in space, right? So I would for the initial, until I escalate it, I would target all sorts of soft kill mechanism to just throw you off. That's already happening.
Wow.
What is the hard kill mechanism? Nobody's just because nobody's done it doesn't mean nobody will do it.
Right.
And there is no international there is norms, there are no laws. So it is perfectly plausible. What unfortunately it does is it creates a debris issue that impacts the person who did it also. Because
Everybody,
a debris hitting your own satellite is the last thing that you want to do.
Right. Let's go. It's a rich topic. Let's go to the future. It's 2029, and we made some massive investments. It seems like over the next 3 years, I think we can expect some massive investments in our national security and our space capabilities. From an industry perspective, I mean, our audience for the podcast are generally executives from the government contracting industry. Where do you see us in 2029, Bharath?
Where do I see ourselves? I think the constellations are becoming the norm. Okay, you're not. Um, one is obviously, yeah, the constellation of satellites. The launcher, I think, you would, I would at least ideally like to see. The launch industry is a much more rigorous industry. It's a more difficult industry. I fear that we don't have sufficient launch capacity. Okay, so those are some of the things that um, that I would like to see. You're talking about data centers in space. I'm not sure. Again, I would not put it past anybody, but it's an idea that has been floated and consistently being talked about. I would see somebody pursuing, because there is in my view, I think there is an excess capital in the space domain today, and there is going to be one or two Silicon Valley kind of people who are going to pursue this idea. The other day, I was talking to a company. She's based out of the Silicon Valley, one of the executives. What is she doing? She's trying to build an MRO base in space for all the space operations. Okay. So 2029, is that a reality? Could be a reality. There is another company that I've just followed a little bit because that intrigued me. Um, they put mirrors in space. The physics of it, I've still not been able to understand, but they've raised money from people like Lux Capital and stuff. Okay, so what do? They reflect light in areas where they reflect solar light into areas where there is night. They can make it day, and they harness energy. So it's like a clean energy initiative out of space.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah.
What about this kind of the noise you hear around getting to the moon and setting up? Does that become a new front from a national security perspective?
I kind of like I get the euphoria around it, going to the moon and coming, but I've always been a skeptic of it in some sense. That actually I've not been intrigued by it, because yes, there are, one can always make the argument that there are other spin-offs. You test these technologies, the radiation and all that kind of stuff, but there is always that skeptic question of, you did the moon and then what? Okay, where does that lead you beyond? What is the ultimate goal? If that is your forever end, that is fine. Okay, space tourism, okay, zero gravity, that's okay, I think. But these are very costly experiments, and the threshold is very high, and the failure for the error for margin is the margin for error is so low. So you want to be careful with these kinds of things. But I have not been always um, this thing. I've not been convinced. If there is something that I would want to, for any one of your executives, like if I would want to evaluate, I think somebody did this, or I've been running around with this idea since 2014. Can we quantify today how much of Jake's life and my life is dependent on space? Where are the vulnerabilities on all these kinds of stuff? And today, if one of those assets were knocked out, do we have a redundancy? And do we have a reliability? And you know what is the insurance angle on something like this? That is something that I would put it. Now, the national security angle for this is completely different, because you want something totally different. But there is also a commercial civilian angle for something like this is different. And the investors and the government alike, I think they're all thinking in these kinds of things. For an operational planner, he's looking at the redundancy. So in 2029, when I fast forward, these are the futuristic technologies. Yes, they solve future existing innovative problems like data centers in space. Maybe it's a great idea powered by nuclear reactors. Maybe it's brilliant, right? Take the thing away from the earth, it's good. Um,
what would be one word you would use to describe your kind of gut feeling about the government contracting industry in this space sector?
in this sector, one word would be adaptability.
Okay, why is that?
The adaptability is because you are not anymore relying, like Anduril's $20 billion, was it 20 billion? Yeah, counter UAS program with the government contracting world. It was a sole source straight away. We can, they can use their Lattice program. It's not the way the government contracting is always worked with the traditional primes. You don't need the traditional primes anymore. So that's that the wall. It's kind of the Berlin Wall moment for the government, the U.S. government contracting wall.
Interesting, fascinating.
Right.
I like that. I like
Yeah.
that, especially given your background. Well, look, Bharath, I appreciate you coming in and sharing some of your background and your perspective on space. It's a huge topic. It's really good to have an expert like you on the roster in case any of our customers want support looking at this strategically. Of course, you also have the UAS knowledge and a lot to share with our industry. We'll have to bring you back on as the world evolves and as GovCon evolves to check in and see how things are going. So we look forward to staying in touch with you.
Likewise, it's always been a pleasure to work with you and your colleagues. You have a great team, and a great team means a great leader. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Bharath.
Much appreciated. And we continue the conversation.
Awesome. All right. To our audience, hopefully you enjoyed this episode of the Future of GovCon talking space. There's a lot going on there. And watch out for Bharath. He's going to do more great things. So make sure you're tracking him. And make sure you tune in next week. We got a great show coming on next week. I say it every week. I believe it. I know it because it's happening. The future of GovCon is happening today. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, so thanks for joining me on another episode of the Future of GovCon. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation and some of the bold predictions. If you did, take a second, share it on your social media, subscribe on YouTube. If you have any ideas for future guests or topics you'd like to have covered, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always there, and you can always learn more about precision talent solutions at pts.careers. Look forward to seeing you next week on our next episode.